Hi, everyone. My name is Adrienne McCraw. I'm with Special Events and Protocol, and on behalf of the Events Council and my co-chair, Darlene Schluter, we welcome you here today. So today's webinar will focus on Regents Policy 5402. We understand that there may be some other questions or uncertainty around events in general, but today our focus will be on the policy and how it pertains to events and planning. So there will be an events town hall coming up on October 5th at 2:30 p.m. This will address events more broadly. Any events questions not specific to our topic today can be submitted when you register for the town hall, and we put the link below for you. So today you're going to hear from our campus experts from our labor relations team who will break down what this policy means for events on campus. We have disabled the chat feature, not because we don't want to chat with you. I believe we disabled the chat feature. If not, we're going to shortly, but simply because it's a bit distracting when we try to give a presentation. You can still utilize the Q&A, of course, found at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to monitor questions and answers accordingly. Please note that we did receive a good amount of pre-submitted questions, so we'll try to get through all of those as well. And in an effort to answer all these questions, we decided to categorize them, and we'll do our best to answer, like I said, as many as possible. So today's webinar is being recorded. So if you know of anyone who may have missed this, please let them know, and they can check our Blinks Events Council page later this week for that recording. That's a mouthful. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Darlene to introduce our speakers. Take it away, Darlene.
Thank you, Adrienne, and hello, everyone. Again, I'm Darlene Schluter, and at this time, I'd like to introduce our UC San Diego Human Resources colleagues to start the conversation. Please welcome our presenters today, Otis Crockett, Labor Relations Senior Operations Manager, and Jonathan Connolly, Labor Relations Advocate. Thank you both.
Good morning, Darlene.
Good morning, everyone. Otis, you want to start and introduce yourself?
Sure. So before we start talking substantively about the policy, I'd just take a couple moments to introduce myself, and Jonathan will introduce himself. My name is Otis Crockett. I am the Senior Operations Manager for Labor Relations here on UCSD campus. If you don't know, Labor Relations is a unit of campus human resources. It's part of Labor Relations. It is our job to help the campus in both representing the university in disputes regarding our collective bargaining agreements with our different unions, and also helping all of our campus colleagues comply with all of the various regulations that we have in place that deal with both our represented employees and our unrepresented employees. It's important to note that Regents Policy 5402 is also part of a collective bargaining agreement that we have with a labor union that represents our service employees, and that's the AFSCME 3299 labor group. So when we talk about Regents Policy 5402 today, we'll also be talking about the AFSCME collective bargaining agreement. It's Article 5 of that collective bargaining agreement, because they basically mirror each other. John?
Hi, everyone. John Connolly. I am a labor relations advocate. I've been here for about 2 years at UCSD. Previously, I worked at a couple law firms here in San Diego, litigating employment-related lawsuits, harassment, discrimination, retaliation type disputes. And then I came on board here at UCSD and started working with the SX bargaining unit, which brings us to our topic today, which is Article 5 of that collective bargaining agreement, and Regents Policy 5402. And as Otis mentioned, they're essentially one and the same. So when we refer to one, we're being inclusive of the other. So today we'll give you a little background on the policy and the article. We'll tell you about the prohibitions on contracting out for covered services, some of the exceptions that may apply, other considerations when contracting out when an exception does apply, wage and benefit parity that needs to be paid to contracted employees, qualified individuals, which is a term used in the agreement and the policy, which may entitle certain employees to jobs here at UCSD. We'll tell you about some of the reporting requirements we have, and we'll talk to you a little bit about the procedure for getting this work performed and the steps that you all need to take to ensure that there are no gaps in service. So why are we here today? We have a workforce of service employees. Being UC employees, they're pretty expensive. They come with a lot of bureaucracy. They come with a lot of red tape. It's tough to get what you need done. So historically, for a lot of these jobs, we've contracted with private companies to provide us with employees to get the work done. Private employees pay their companies a lot less than we do. They don't provide benefits oftentimes. Working conditions are not as good as they would be here at UCSD. They might not have the job stability that they would have at UCSD. So now we have a situation where we have two people working side by side doing the exact same job here on campus. One is making UC wages and benefits. They have job stability. They have great working conditions. But then the other's making minimum wage. They've got no benefits at all. They have no job security. Their working conditions may not be as good. So AFSCME is the union, as Otis mentioned, that represents these employees here at UCSD, or UC system-wide. And they use their political influence to begin the process to amend the California Constitution. And this amendment would have essentially prohibited across the board any type of contracting for these services done by UCSD. And in order to head that off, we adopted Regents Policy 5402 and later entered into a new collective bargaining agreement with AFSCME, which had the similar language. And the intent here is really to increase wages and to better working conditions for these service employees, and it does it in a couple ways. One, it increases the number of UC hires, which makes the market more competitive. And two, it requires wage and benefit parity rates to be paid to contracted employees in the event that an exception is met, and we can contract out. So the idea is wages for everyone who performs this type of work go up. Working conditions for everyone who perform this type of work get better. So before we get into the meat of the policy, it's really important to remember that this is a new policy. It's a new provision in a contractual agreement. It's not extremely well written. It's fairly ambiguous. There's been a lot of inconsistent interpretation so far. There's a lot of changing guidance. There's a lot of changing application of these rules. So what we tell you today what we tell you today will change. And that's just the nature of implementing a new policy. So we want you to be aware of the issues that are involved in applying this policy. But we also want you to be aware that things may be different down the road. So it's really important to consult with us, Otis and I, anyone else in labor relations who can help point you in the right direction and help flush the issues out so we get a correct and consistent application of the rules. So what are the rules here? There's a general prohibition on contracting out for covered services. The policy says that we're going to utilize our employees to perform these services to the greatest extent possible before resorting to the use of private contractors. We can only contract out for covered services under limited circumstances described in the policy.
So John, before you get to...
Yeah,
oh, okay, I was going to say, can you give us what is a covered service? I mean,
What
I
is
think
a covered
that's the
service? That's a great
baseline question.
So covered services are specifically identified in the policy, and I'll go over some of them now. Some of them won't apply to us, and they'll apply just to the health centers, which I don't think many of us here deal with. But for a more exhaustive list, take a look at the policy and the collective bargaining agreement. But specifically listed are cleaning, custodial, janitorial, and housekeeping services, food services, so any type of food service work, catering is included in that, laundry services, groundskeeping, so groundskeeping, landscaping, building maintenance, transportation and parking services, that includes valet services, shuttle bus services, security services, billing and coding, sterile processing, and a couple others that deal only with the medical center. So anything outside of those specifically identified categories of services that might be performed is most likely outside of the scope of this policy. So I'm not going to tell you it's okay to contract out for those because there might be broader implications with respect to other collective bargaining agreements, other UC policies, and other departmental policies. But for the purposes of this discussion today, things like clerical, skilled trades, work performed by any other bargaining unit is not necessarily our concern for the purposes of Regents Policy 5402 and the AFSCME contract. Also outside of the scope of the policy is management work or supervisory work. So if there is a case where you need to contract out for a supervisor of folks that perform these services, that specific portion, the supervisory portion, is excluded. That's not necessarily a concern either. So these are, they seem straightforward categories. Cleaning, food service, but sometimes we run into some ambiguous job duties. We run into folks who perform a lot of different duties in the scope of their work, especially with outside contractors. So if there's any ambiguity at all, if there's any question as to what these folks do and whether or not it's a covered service, feel free to contact us. We can help answer those questions. We consult with compensation and classification to make that determination. They're experts in the policy, and they're experts in what is a covered service and what is outside of the scope of the policy. So please contact us if there's any question before you contract out, because that way, if the wrong decision is made, we're the ones to blame and not you. So. And that's going to be a consistent message here today, is contact us, because there is a lot of ambiguity with the policy. There's a lot of ambiguity with some of these contracts that we have going out to these contractors. So involve us. That's what we're here for. So in a nutshell, if you have a service that needs to be performed that falls in any of those categories, you have to have UC folks do it. You have to talk with facilities management, HDH for catering events. You have to talk with the police department for security services. You have to have these services performed by UC employees. If there's any question about who does it and who you can contact to get UC employees to cover these services, please let us know, and we can help point you in the right direction. So if you've contacted those folks and you have received a message that they can't perform the services, it may fall under one of the limited exceptions that I discussed before. And as another disclaimer, these exceptions, again, are not extremely well worded. Some situations where you think an exception would apply, they wouldn't apply. Some of the exceptions actually, they really don't have any teeth. So we could rely on them all we want, but the more we rely on them, the less effective they are, because additional questions arise after every time we use an exception. Why didn't we take steps to prevent it for the next use or for the next event? So I'll go through those briefly here today, but again, it's really important that you contact us. All these exceptions need to be vetted through labor relations. So let us know if you think an exception applies. Don't just assume it does. So the first one is if an emergency situation arises. That's a term that should be applied very narrowly. And an emergency is not that you forgot to plan and now FM can't get you a guy right away for an event that you have tomorrow. An emergency is the stoppage of university operations because of some unexpected event that occurred. Not that we just didn't do our due diligence here, okay? So the next exception is if we don't have the employees in sufficient numbers or skills to perform the services. Now this is one that falls into the category of toothless exceptions, because we can say that we don't have the employees, we don't have the numbers, we can't provide the service because we just don't have the manpower to do it. But every time we say that, the question is, why don't we hire folks on? Why don't we bring more manpower on so when these events arise, we can staff enough people? We can staff the event with enough people. So that's not one we can really rely on to an extent that would allow you to contract out without any real repercussions. But on the other hand, if there's really a technical need or a skill that you see does not regularly perform, you see employees don't regularly perform, that may fall into the exception. It's a very nuanced analysis. So again, consult with us if you think this applies.
So can you give us, why don't you give them an example of maybe a skill or a technical situation where we just don't have the people or the equipment?
Sure. So there are a couple examples I can give you. One is for example, a general custodial need. We can say, and we have said, that we don't have enough folks to take on this new project that was previously contracted out. It's a long hiring process. We can't get people in quickly enough, and at the end of the day, that argument's just not going to fly. But we have a couple facilities that deal with really highly technical computer equipment. They need to be cleaned a certain way. There needs to be a certain level of knowledge about what to avoid, what they can touch, what they can't touch, because touching the wrong thing could fry the entire system. In that case, there are specialty contractors that are trained to clean these specific systems. So in a case like that, we can rely on an exception at least for the short term until potentially we can hire someone on and get them trained up. Another example of that is services that may require specialized technology. One example I can give you of that is carpet cleaning. This stuff, we can't go out and rent a rug doctor from the local hardware store. You need trucks with truck-mounted carpet cleaning equipment that you just can't go out and rent or buy. Contractors already have that stuff, so we can rely on that exception, at least again for the short term, until the question is why can't we hire on our own folks? So something like that may fall into an exception, but again, there are a lot of questions that come up each time we use them about why we can't start hiring these folks on. And these questions come from AFSCME. These questions also come from the Chancellor and the Regents, who are 100% behind this policy. So it's not that we're trying to give you a hard time and trying to spoil your events fund. It's that there's some major players that really want this policy followed. Another exception is when the services are incidental to a lease or the purchase of real estate. So, for example, if we lease space on an off-campus property, and that lease says we have to use a specific cleaning company, then that may fall into an exception. But I can't imagine there are other considerations involved in that, and I think for the most part, we're looking at off-campus properties in that situation, and there are some other issues that may arise when we're looking at off-campus properties, or other considerations that we have when we're looking at off-campus properties. So consult with us on those if you're using space off-campus. The fourth exception is an urgent, temporary, or an occasional need. So if we're looking at a one-off need, we're going to use some services one time and never again, that may fall into the exception. But when you're looking at the types of services performed, this exception is not going to it's not going to be widely applicable, because most of these services can be retasked to perform other types of jobs in the same category. So, for example, if you need a custodian once, that would seemingly fit into the exception, but we can use that custodian in other locations on campus. So we should just be hiring the custodian in instead of contracting out for that. So
the other complication, just let me add this, the other
Absolutely.
complication that we have here on our campus is that we have temporary employment services who have the ability to hire people for short-term needs. So I know for many of the events, you would think, hey, look, this is a one-time event. I need 20 custodians, or I need 20 food service workers. I only need them for one day. If we didn't have temporary employment services, that argument may be a little bit more persuasive. But because we have the ability to hire in people for very short terms here on campus, it makes it more complicated for us. So I just want to make sure we make that point to you, that yes, we do understand that your events are short term, they're temporary, but we do have the ability to hire short term needs. So we have to be able to show, and this is one of the things that Jonathan talked about, have we tried and gone through the process of talking to TES, talking to housing dining, talking to facilities management to see whether or not they can provide those short-term needs.
Right. So we do get a lot of requests for exceptions for reasons that fall outside of that specific list. Those can be found in the policy. They can be found in the CBA. So take a look if you need more clarification on those. But I just wanted to highlight that anything that falls outside of those specific reasons is not going to qualify you for an exception. Because it's your friend's company and you want to give them the business, it's not an exception. You've been doing that same way for years. You've been contracting out and you want to continue doing that. It's not good enough for an exception. The contractor is cheaper than using HDH or FM. The chancellor knows, the regents know, AFSCME knows it's not going to be cheaper to use our folks, but it's not a reason to not use our own folks. We know we're going to be spending more money on this in the long run, in most cases.
Yeah. And I want to just add that this was a major part of the discussions about that this will increase costs to the university. This will increase costs to departments. And this was specifically discussed with the regents. The regents understand that. However, as Jonathan talked about at the very beginning, the goal of the policy for the region, for purposes of the regents, is to try to use UC dollars to raise the standard for all service workers, whether they're in the UC or not in the UC. So there is a conscious decision and conscious trade-off that has been made that we are going to increase our costs to try to increase the quality of life, the quality of jobs for people outside of the UC. So I just want to make sure everyone understands that. This is understood, we know it, it was considered, but it was the overriding value of increasing the service workers and their quality of life was deemed more important than the increase in cost to the departments.
And that's a great segue to our next topic, which is wage and benefit parity requirements. But before we get to that, I just want to say, consult with us on these exceptions. Get us in early, get us in often. Oftentimes, departments think the contracting out is the only way to do this, but we work with them. They're aware. The service provider departments are aware of this obligation. They're on board. They have been staffing up to provide these services in-house. And lastly, on this topic, we're the gatekeepers for the exceptions. We're the first folks who take a look at them and approve them or deny them, but we're not the final arbiters here. The regents are, arbitrators are once grievances have been filed, and they will be filed because AFSCME has been filing grievances on contracted out services, regardless of the merits of our exceptions. So be aware that if you do contract out relying on a grievance that we approved, you are still going to have to fight a grievance, and you are still going to have to answer to the chancellor and the regents at some point. So wage and benefit parity requirements. If we do say that you meet an exception and you can't contract out, the contractor who is performing the services has to agree to pay its employees what's called the wage and benefit parity rate. And that's essentially what the employee would have been making had they worked for UCSD. That is not a cheap rate. Oftentimes these guys, like I said, are making minimum wage at their contracted when they're working for these contractors. But the cheapest wage and benefit parity rate right now is over $26 an hour. So the contractor has to agree to pay their employees that rate, the equivalent rate to the job that they would be performing at UCSD. It oftentimes goes much higher than $26 an hour. This makes contracts more expensive. We know this, and again, this policy is not designed to save you money. So if you do contract out, you have to know that it's going to be more expensive than it was in the past. Plan for this in advance with your budgets, and plan for this in advance with your contractors. Make them aware of this requirement for their employees, that they have to pay their employees a higher rate. Because oftentimes what happens is you go out and get bids, and then you run into labor relations who tells you have to go back and inform the contractor of this requirement. And that raises the cost of the contract. So the contractor has to rebid. If you've only got a couple days before your event, that's going to cause problems. The contractor is going to have to rebid that. There might not be enough time to increase the budget. The contractor may refuse to do the service at all. We've had a few contractors back out because they don't want to comply with the wage and benefit parity requirement. And this is something that they have to agree to, or we just can't contract with them. Procurement can help walk you through the process, and I'm available to explain it to To the vendors, if they don't understand the requirement or they're unclear as to why it exists, feel free to contact me. I can assist you in those conversations.
So, Jonathan, I'm looking at the time. We want to leave time for questions. So I think from our perspective, the most important piece to understand is when you are looking at whether or not there is something that is a contract for is a covered service, any kind of food service, you should contact us. And again, events planning, I know there'll be a lot of catering questions. Contact us. Many times we can tell you yes or no, but there's some nuance to all of these situations. So what we're saying is contact us. If there's custodial involved, contact us, because again, we can also help you navigate through the campus departments who may be able to help you comply with the policy. And then the other most important point about this, before we get to questions and answers, is even if you're able to contract out, even if you're able to meet one of the exceptions, the contractor will still have to pay wage and benefit parity. As Jonathan said, that is a significant number, $26 an hour versus, I think, what, $15 an hour, which is our minimum wage. So your costs will be increased. That was done on purpose because it's designed to try to funnel the departments back to trying to use university resources, university employees. Those are the major points I think that we wanted to get across to you today, but we also really wanted to leave time for the question and answer. So I think we'll leave it there for our presentation and then take the questions for you.
Go ahead. One more point that I wanted to hit on before you get to question and answer, and it has to do with our reporting requirements. We have to report all of these contracts to AFSCME in February every year, regardless of dollar value. But for contracts that are valued over $100,000, we have to notice AFSCME in advance. So if you have a large dollar contract that you think meets an exception and you're relying on that, contact us. Give us plenty of time to work with you and work with the department, the service providing department, to document the need for the exception and to notice AFSCME. We have to do it 30 days in advance. So give us at least 60 days if you have one of these large dollar contracts coming up, $100,000 or over. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you for that information. That was a lot that you shared. You covered several items and hopefully answered some questions for folks. But as you can imagine, there are still tons of questions, especially as they relate to events. So if it's okay, I'd like to ask you the first question. What if the same level, variety, or quality of service is not available on campus? How is that considered? Are there special accommodations for particular activities like high-end donor events?
I'll take that question. This particular question was actually part of the discussion when the entire policy was written, when it was first being discussed. And let me just say, this was a very big point of contention with the union, because implied in the question is that university employees are not good enough. The question implies that university employees are not up to the task. So the general answer to this question is it does not matter whether they're high-end donors. It does not matter. However, if there are things that, for example, HDH, our housing, our catering, they don't have the ability to make, right? It's not a matter of quality, it's a matter of skill. We may be able to have an exception under one of those limited exceptions. But the general rule is that we should first work with our university partners, in this case, housing, dining, and hospitality, and their catering, to determine whether or not we can provide whatever service is needed for an event. So I hope I made that clear. it was a major point of contention with the union. So there is no general rule that if it's a certain type of event, we can go ahead and bypass the policy. No.
Yeah, and I think also clear communication of your expectations for our in-house services, clearly communicating what's needed. Another question, and this has come in a few different ways, so hopefully this answers the different ways, but how does the policy apply to holding events off campus? So for instance, a dinner at a local restaurant or a chair reception at a chair's house and they have food catered in. What are those? Are those under any of the exceptions?
Generally,
Jonathan.
off-campus events would fall outside of the scope of the policy.
And leave it at that. That's all. That's it. We're good. Yes. Okay. Next question.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's right. The generally off-campus events are events that are not on university property. Those fall outside of the scope of this policy. The only caveat I would tell you is if it appears that we are no longer holding events on campus, we're taking all of our money and spending it elsewhere, that could ultimately lead to a revision of the policy. But as we stand right now, the general rule is if it's off campus, it does not implicate the Regents policy or Article 5.
In addition to that, they should reach out to their fiscal team too to make sure they can even host an event off campus.
Yeah, now that's a separate question. It's important for everyone to understand that regardless of whether or not we in labor relations say, hey, yeah, you meet an exception, or yes, this does not apply, the policy doesn't apply, we are making absolutely no opinion, we're giving no guidance on whether or not the funds that you want to use for this are able to be used, right? So if you have a grant or something and you're wondering whether or not you can use those funds, you still need to go back to your fiscal people, to the people in your department, and determine whether or not that is allowed under whatever fiscal policy you're under. We are not making any representations as it relates to whether or not certain funds can be used or not used.
Okay, great. Back to the catering. As you can imagine, there's tons of confusion centered around catering. So is all food at an event on campus considered full service catering? Can we purchase takeout from an off-campus restaurant and eat it on campus?
Yes. Full service catering. full service catering is just that. It's when you have food service workers, whether they're UC or a contracted food service worker doing the same type of duties, coming in and preparing the food and serving the food, cleaning up afterwards, and providing those types of full services. If you have an event where you brought food in off campus and you lay it out on a table and it's self-serve, everyone cleans up after themselves, then that should fall outside of the scope of the policy. The other one is alcohol sales. We can contract out for alcohol service as long as that's the only thing they're doing.
What if they're doing soda and alcohol? That's to be seen.
Yeah, I think that would be fine, but we would probably want to have a quick conversation to make sure that's not being done, as Otis mentioned, with the intent of end arounding the policy. Right.
Thank you.
I guess it's my turn, right? Let's see. I'm just gonna read one that's come in here. We're gonna pick one. Going off of the wage and parity discussion, Jonathan, you mentioned those contractors would be paid a higher wage and that would reflect into the contract. Who needs to affirm that the rates are actually being paid by the contractor to their employees if we go that route?
Okay, well, what we usually do is have a wage and benefit parity addendum signed by the contractor. And essentially what that says is I, contractor, agree to pay my employees this rate, performing these services. That at this time satisfies our obligation. It has to be someone who has the authority to sign that with the contractor. But at this point, that would satisfy our obligation.
Let me just add, if there's a concern that someone in the department has to go and verify it, that is not the case. If there's going to be any verification, that would be done through legal or procurement. It's not going to be the department that has the duty to go and go get receipts or pay stubs or anything like that. So I hope that allays some of that fear.
I think that's what the answer we were hoping for.
All right.
It sounds like there's a lot of moving parts and different players in this process. Can you tell us about how you include other areas like procurement, or how do you work with colleagues across other campuses, and how are those things aligned?
Sure, I think I'll take that one. It's important to note that although this policy is a regional policy and also part of the collective bargaining agreement, and usually labor has the duty to interpret and manage collective bargaining agreements, it encompasses so many different areas that it's not just labor that's involved, right? As Jonathan said, sometimes things come in and we need to understand whether or not something would fit a classification that would be a covered service. So we have to work with our compensation and classification colleagues. As we talked about, procurement is the department that deals with all of these contracts. So we work very closely with procurement on this policy and implementation. We also talked a lot about housing and dining, and they have to be able to come in and have, in many cases, an opportunity to see whether or not they can provide the services. So obviously we work very closely with housing and dining. We have, sometimes with custodial, we have to deal with facilities management, whether or not they have enough people. So we have to work with FM, we have to work with temporary employment services. So we have this, at the campus level, we have this very large group of folks that we are constantly in contact with to try to make sure that we are providing, the university, are providing the service that all of you need to be able to be in compliance with the contract. But not just here at the campus level, even at the system-wide level, many of those same groups at the system-wide level are working together to interpret the policy to make sure that the university as a whole will be in compliance. I can tell you that we've had high-level discussions that have included President Drake, the chief operating officer of the university. We've had discussions that have included the head of procurement. We've had discussions that have included UC Legal, and we have those discussions here on our campus as well. So it's not just it's not just Jonathan saying yes or no. I hold all the power. It's not Onus saying I hold all the power. We are actually collaborating with many different groups to make sure that we're providing you the guidance that is going to give you the maximum flexibility, but also keep us within the scope of the policy.
All right, how are we on time? I don't even remember when this ends. Are we doing
like
okay?
15 minutes or so.
Okay, all right, great. I think another question that are on some people's minds are, what about the restaurants that are on campus right now? Can we host events, and can those on-campus restaurants offer the catering and full service catering? Question mark.
This is one of the more difficult questions because, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of inconsistent interpretation and application of this. And this is one of the areas where I'm going to urge you all to consult with us well in advance with all of the information that you can provide, so we can consult with legal and we can consult with Office of the President and make sure we're compliant, because that's an area that we really don't want to misstep. And Office of the President is still trying to iron out some of these details, and unfortunately, because of that, we can't give you straight answers to all of these questions today.
Okay. Well, how about maybe you could answer this one? What are the options and requirements if the university is not paying for the event expenses? A non-affiliate group, a student organization?
I'll take that one. That's another one of those where we can't give you a black or white answer. It depends upon the circumstance. And I'll just give you an example. Affiliate groups, right now, we have been given the advice that if it's an affiliate group, for example, a student group who is putting on the event, then the policy does not apply to them. However, if the associate students, which seems to be a student group, is putting on an event, we've been told, at least at this point, that the policy does apply, right? So even that's why we are so adamant about you all contacting us about this, because the reality is that many of these questions will not be answered until there's some litigation on this and a third party neutral, such as an arbitrator, makes a decision about what this language means. What we're trying to do is give everyone options to minimize our risk so that we are not the campus that is on the losing end of one of those decisions. Again, one of the things that you have to understand about this policy is that it is a very politically tinged policy. It is a major political issue. And so when we are giving advice, we are also keeping in mind that if we're wrong, if we lose, it will be used as, and I'm not, it's not a good thing or bad thing as I'm saying this, it will simply be used to further whatever goal which whoever wins has, right? We don't want you all involved in the middle of the politics of this policy. We want you to be able to put your events on, have some level of certainty, and be able to do your job. So just keep that in mind, that we're not trying to be obtuse with you. We're not trying to hide the ball from you, but we are being upfront with you that it is not always a black and white situation. It's not always yes or no. There is ambiguity, and we'll help you navigate that ambiguity and get you the best answer, the best advice that we can give you based upon what we know at the time.
Thank you.
That's really helpful. Yeah, thank you. And actually, it's a great segue to the next kind of set of questions. With everyone kind of learning the new policy, what it covers, what it doesn't, and with COVID precautions in place, with staffing issues, we foresee there possibly being needs for exceptions. So can you I know you touched briefly on this, can you walk us through how to get an exception to outsource if the university cannot provide the specific service? And then what if an exception to outsource is denied, what's kind of that escalation path, or what can we do and how can we do it? It's a lot. I'm sorry. Let me know if I need to.
No, Jonathan, why don't you take the first part and I'll take the second part about the escalation path.
Perfect. So there are a couple of different directions you could take, but all roads kind of lead to me. So you can feel free to reach out to me first to loop me in. I might be able to give you a quick answer. Most of the time I can't. It's, as Otis mentioned, a lot of consultation with a lot of different people and a lot of different responsibilities. So the first thing I would do is contact the department who would provide the service. So if you're looking at custodial, then it'd be FM or HDH. If you're looking at groundskeeping, that would be FM. Security, the police department. That's really the first step here, is to see if they can offer the service. And if they can, then we don't need to go any further. They'll just do it, and then we don't need to contract out. But if they can't, you need to involve labor relations, you need to involve procurement, and you need to involve the contractor. Those are really the main parties that need to all get together and have a discussion about the scope of the work being performed, why we can't do the work, the wage and benefit parity requirements, other requirements that procurement might have. That's really the direction you want to go, is first talk to the department and loop me in and loop procurement in.
So let's talk about escalation. So if you have a situation where you've now talked to Jonathan, and I'll just be candid with everyone, in labor relations, Jonathan is our first approver, or person who looks at it and says yes or no. And as long, the reality is, if you're explaining what's happening and we have the information, we're able to approve many of these exceptions. But if you get into a situation where you feel that Jonathan hasn't seen everything or doesn't understand the problem, the reality is I'd be the next person that you would follow up with. Please understand, almost all the communications that you would have with Jonathan, I'm probably copied. He's probably already talked to about those things with me, and we've probably already discussed them. It's not usually a one-man yes or no. Again, we have this collaborative approach. But if you did get into that situation, you could always escalate to me. From there, if you really were not happy with what labor relations did, I guess at that point you could contact the VC CFO, because he's the ultimate responsible executive on the campus for this policy. So that's kind of the steps you would take. Please understand, anything that is a controversial or anything that's big and we're not sure about that, we keep him in the loop as well. So I'm giving you the steps. I'm just letting you know that it's not likely that if we don't think that it's something that we can defend, that Pierre or someone else is going to override that. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, thank you. Some of our colleagues are on this call from other campuses, and they've recently received directive regarding a new policy. I believe it's SB 820. We know this is new directive, but if there's any information you can share, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so SB 820, which stands for Senate Bill 820, at a very high level, what this bill, which was signed in 2017, I believe, says is that the university each year must certify that certain buildings that are being funded with certain government dollars or public funds, we have to certify that all work being done in those buildings, all covered services being done in those buildings, is being done by university employees. Unlike Article 5 and the Regional Policy that gives us exceptions, if we have an emergency or something, Senate Bill 820 does not have any language in there about an exception. So we're just getting our arms around this. I say we, that's that same large group of people that we've been talking about. at OP, you know, the president's office, human resources at OP legal, OP labor, all of the different procurement, all of the different groups to figure out what impact this has on Article 5 and the Regional Policy 5402, and you know, what's the interplay between those. That's also another reason at this point that we are encouraging you to reach out to us if you have any question about the contracting out, because we're going to be learning about the interaction. And again, some of the answers we give you now may have to change based upon what we are learning. So Jonathan has said it many times during it. Our advice to you is reach out to us, let us know what you want to do, and then we can help you make sure that we are in compliance. But yeah, SB 820 is a new wrinkle that may completely change the way we do stuff, or it may not have any impact depending upon where you want to have the event. But please, you know, give us a chance to have a discussion with you to try to make sure that we can try to be in compliance with both the policy and SB 820.
That's great. Thank you. I think we have time for one more quick question. Oh, where did it just go? Oh, maybe you answered it, Darlene. Sorry.
Is it about vendors?
Yeah, I was gonna ask Laura's question. I thought that was a good question,
It's
but
under
now
the
I can see
answered,
it.
it's under the answered questions.
Just scrolling through all your questions. These are all great questions. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so I thought this was a good one from one of our on-campus vendors. Is as a campus vendor, we have clients that need a referral to an off-campus vendor, as we may not have staffing or resources to support their event. And she wants to know, do they just refer them directly to you? Which we kind of went over that, but I think for our vendors on the call, I think clarity for them would be helpful as well.
Yeah, that's fine, and we can work with them to find an off-campus vendor, or work with the service provider to see what other alternatives we might be able to provide. And we would have to be looped in anyway at some point to approve the exception. So the best time to do that is early.
And on that same question, do you have any issues with students or student organizations reaching out to you directly?
None at all.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to stress this. If you have a question and you're not sure, reach out to us. Whoever you are, whatever you're doing, reach out to us. That's why we're here. We're here to help make sure and be the resource to help all of us navigate, you know, the regional policy and everything that is around it. Reach out to us.
Thank you, guys. That was really helpful. Well, that's all we have time for.
I think you're on mute.
Am I?
No, now you're good.
Oh, weird. Internet. It's all we have time for. I want to thank Otis and Jonathan for joining us today. Hopefully we were able to answer at least a few of your questions. Again, they have openly said, call them at all hours of the night and they will be able to help you. Their email is in the chat for all those questions. Again, thank you, Michaela, for helping us with the webinar and everyone else on the back end. Make sure to check out the Events Council Blink site for updates on upcoming meetings and information. And I hope to see you all soon. Don't forget, we do have that events town hall next month. And I believe we put the link in the chat, and we hope to see you guys all soon. Thanks again.